Get in the game now with Sports Interaction. It's the most exciting 2 weeks of the year, the Stanley Cup Finals and the NBA Finals. It's the best. And you want to be a part of it. The Dangles Doozies section is exploding with crazy props that are still available midway through the Stanley Cup Finals, which is where we are right now. You can bet before the game. You can bet live and play, which Jesse does all the time, and I've watched him do it.
I love live betting.
And, of course, you can head over to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN or download the app to get started. It's 18 plus. Please play responsibly.
The Jesse Blake Sports Report with Jesse Blake. Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada's sportsbook.
Last night, the Denver Nuggets defeated the Miami Heat. Game 5, NBA championship, they won. And season's over. We don't get basketball again until October, which is sad, but it's joyous for all of the fans of the Denver Nuggets because they get their first ever NBA championship. Great moment for their owner, Stan Kroenke, who wins his third championship across the 4 major pro sports in the last 2 years. He's the owner of the Colorado Avalanche. He's the owner of the Denver Nuggets. He's the owner of the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams won the Super Bowl in 2022. Avalanche won the Stanley Cup in 2022. And then now you got the Denver Nuggets winning the NBA championship last night. So pretty impressive. That's one of the greatest owner runs in history. Maybe that's a video. Greatest owner runs in major pro sports history. Who had the best 2-year owner run? Because Stan Kroenke might be number one on that list. But today it's all about Nikola Jokić because I was doing some research during the game and a little bit afterwards and this morning and try to put into context how impressive it is to see what a second round pick, Nikola Jokić famously went in the second round, 41st overall in the draft. He was drafted during a Taco Bell commercial, and very, very famously, this Taco Bell commercial that you can see on the screen right now. And I wanted to just put into context how impressive that is in the history of the NBA, because I don't think after all of he's accomplished right now, I don't think there's an argument to be made that he's not the greatest NBA draft pick of all time. And when I say that, I don't mean he's the greatest player of all time. I mean, in terms of the expected value that you would get for the number 41st overall pick, a second round pick in general, I don't think there's anybody close who provides more value and it has had a greater career than Nikola Jokić. And like, obviously it's not all him, Jamal Murray is a big part of this. Him being out for the last couple playoff runs, you see what Denver might have been able to do in those years. And Aaron Gordon obviously played a big piece, and the rest of the role players on the Nuggets. But today it's about Jokić and just how impressive his career is after being drafted in the second round, and how there's kind of no comparable at all for him in the history of the NBA. And Gilbert Arenas actually brought this discussion to the forefront early March, I think it was. He was talking on his podcast and he called him the greatest draft pick of all time, but he put some context on it. He put Kobe up there. He said MJ is actually the greatest draft pick of all time because he's Michael Jordan. He was drafted 3rd overall after Hakeem Olajuwon and the great Sam Bowie. But I don't think that's how you should look at it in the context of taking a draft pick. You can nail the draft. I'll run down some of these lists and names that I've compiled, and you'll see that calling Michael Jordan the greatest draft pick of all time because he didn't go number 1 and he's the greatest player, and you got him at 3, you're losing a bit of the context of how improbable it is for a second round pick to be what Nikola Jokić is. And an easy way to start with that is with his MVP trophy in 2021. So Jokić wins MVP in 21 and 22 back-to-back, and probably should have had a third, but it's a regular season award, and there's a reason Embiid won during the regular season because Embiid cared about it more during the regular season, and the playoff performance is kind of it's its own thing. You're not supposed to take that into context, but we all know how that debate went and where that settled. So Jokić wins the MVP in 2021. He becomes the first ever second round pick to win the MVP trophy. Prior to Jokić, Steve Nash and Giannis were tied for the lowest draft picks ever to win the MVP award. And Nash and Giannis are a part of what I'm going to dub the 15 club. So they were both drafted 15th overall. And the two other members of the 15 club include Kawhi Leonard, and I'm going to include Kobe Bryant in there, even though he was drafted 13th overall. He's a part of my 13-15 club, if you will. We get Nash and Giannis, who set the record for the lowest draft pick ever to win an MVP trophy. And right there, we get into the context of what Nikola Jokić did is impossible. He's the 41st pick overall. And previous to that, in the 100-year history of the NBA, a player drafted outside of the top 15 had never won an MVP trophy. So right there, we start with, this is insane. He did the thing. And then now that last night he wins the NBA championship, we can add him to this pantheon of greatest draft pick ever, along with all of his other accolades, because championships are how we rank basketball importance. That is how it works. Looking at some of the deeper draft picks and how their careers have played out, we have the 15 club that I mentioned earlier. Kawhi, Nash, Giannis, and then we can squeeze Kobe in there, who was drafted 13th overall. Kobe was drafted by the Hornets, and then the Lakers traded for him on draft day. Kawhi was actually drafted by the Pacers, and then later on, the San Antonio Spurs went and traded for Kawhi, and then Nash was drafted by the Suns, stuck around there for a little bit, and went over to Dallas. And lastly, Giannis. Obviously, Giannis is still in Milwaukee, drafted by the Bucks. And we have there a collection of four players who are four of the greatest. I don't know if you're talking like top 50 or if you're talking top 100, top 75. I think they'd all make the top 75 list for sure. If you're making that list today, I don't know how far we can squeeze that list down. Like, does Giannis make it into top 40 players of all time? It's Kawhi I have in there, Nash and Kobe for sure. But those players are important because I've established here that it is not uncommon to get one of the greatest, let's say, top 30 players of all time at the 15th position in the NBA draft. We can even narrow it down a little because Steph Curry went 7th overall. And if we look at Kobe, who went 13th, when you get to 7 through 13, the NBA draft, and you have now we're getting into the top 15 players of all time. You can see how if you have a pick in the top 15 of the draft, it's not out of the realm of possibility that you can hit on this guy being one of the top 10, top 20, top 30 players ever. The thing about narrowing down the list to top 30 guys is there are only 30 of them, and they weren't all drafted 1 through 5 or 1 through 3. There's wide variety of where these top 30 players were drafted. Now, if we go out to the far reaches of the draft and where some of the more impressive draft picks have come from, in this, I'm talking about Draymond Green, who was drafted in the second round, 35th overall. Manu Ginobili, who went 57th overall. Those guys don't crack the list. Those guys don't make the top 30 all time. I get Draymond has 4 championships. He's the third most important person on a championship team. Same with Ginobili. Tim Duncan is the guy. Tim Duncan is the main piece in this situation. Tony Parker was also there. Ginobili, in no context and no frame of reference in the entire world, would you say is the most important piece of those San Antonio Spurs teams. So even though he's drafted behind Nikola Jokić, you don't say he's had a more impressive career at 57th overall. You can get a role player and a person who is third most important on a championship team undrafted. You can get them deep in the second round. You look at a player like Fred VanVleet, who we'll probably be talking a lot about on this podcast in the coming weeks as he leaves the Raptors for free agency. That's an undrafted player who you could say was, after Siakam and Kawhi Leonard in reverse order, was the third most important on that 2019 Raptors championship run. So we've established here that Top 15, you can get one of the greatest players of all time. And outside of that, when you go down to the second round, what you're going to get is if you hit the ultimate draft pick in the second round, third most important, second, sometimes maybe, important player on a championship team. And what Nikola Jokić is, now that he is an NBA champion, a 2-time MVP, we have one of the all-time greats pulled out of the second round, which makes him the greatest draft pick of all time. And last point here is the Jordan conversation. Is Michael Jordan at 3 the greatest basketball player of all time? More impressive than drafting Nikola Jokić in the second round, one of the all-time best basketball players. Gilbert Arenas fell on the side of Jordan is more impressive because Jordan should go 1. So the fact that you get the greatest of all time at 3 is more impressive. But I look at the context of what a second round pick should be. And I think at the top 3 position, you might end up with one of the greatest players of all time because that's how the draft worked. But the draft never works in the way that in the second round, until Nikola Jokić came around, the NBA draft never, ever could you get one of the all-time greatest players that deep into the draft. And he's the first. But if you draft in the top 3, there's always a chance that you can get an all-time great. Because we've seen players like Kevin Durant go 2nd overall. We've seen all-time greats go outside of the top 1, of the top 2, Jordan at 3, but we've never seen it happen at 41st. And I think that's why when we're looking at Jokic's career and we add on the accolade last night of NBA championship, let's also add on greatest draft pick of all time, greatest player to ever outperform his potential in terms of where he was drafted, if you want to context it like that. Because what he's doing right now is the most impressive thing we've ever seen out of somebody drafted in that position in the NBA, because Tom Brady will always own the title of greatest draft pick ever. But Nikola Jokić, I am crowning you right now best draft pick in NBA history. Thank you for being here. You could have been anywhere in the world, which shows me here right now, watching or listening to this, and I appreciate you. Don't forget to hit like on the video or subscribe on the channel, or if you were listening, rate this podcast on Spotify or Apple. Really appreciate it. Thank you for being here. Have a great evening.
And that is how it's done.
The Jesse Blake Sports Report with Jesse Blake, powered by Sports Interaction, Canada's sportsbook.
Jesse Blake, the guy that likes to hear his name twice in one sentence. Sure, I know him. No, he doesn't have an ego at all.